Hey everybody, welcome to our channel. Hey guys, we're your hosts, M and J, and today we're looking at issue 6 of the Wonder Twins. Honestly, after reading this issue, we're not entirely sure if the people behind this comic really understand what superheroes are and what they do, which is concerning because this comic was published under DC, one of the big two, and superheroes are kind of their thing. But it seems like we're supposed to root for the villains, or at least sympathize with them and their cause, and that the Justice League is wrong for trying to stop them. But the truth is, these villains aren't likable or sympathetic at all. They're actually really terrible. So the comic's message falls flat because of it. Ultimately, this comic is not a story, it's just a lecture, and a poorly thought out lecture at that. The story structure, pacing, character development, almost every aspect of the writing of this book is a complete failure, because all these aspects of storytelling were put on the back burner in favor of this poorly thought out and executed message. This is probably the best cover we've gotten from this series. It does connect to the story and it's probably the most eye-catching, and I like how it doesn't have so much white space. But this issue picks up where the last issue left off, with the Scrambler informing the world that he's going to switch everyone's bodies in exactly 30 days, all because he doesn't understand what a magician's job is. This is such weak motivation for a villain. We initially thought that he was going to scramble everybody's bodies unless the world can fix all of its problems within a month, but apparently he's going to do it regardless of whatever they do. Realistically, this would doom the human race, but the comic insists that they're in the right, despite the fact that it also acknowledges that they're going to kill a lot of people. It's really disgusting, honestly. Even the 1,000,000 people that they already scrambled, that probably killed a lot of people already. Like, what about the people that need to take medication, but now someone else is in their body and they don't know that that body needs medication, so then they die? Or what about people who suffer from anxiety and depression and the stress from this situation caused them to take their own lives? Not that they would take responsibility for any of this. So yeah, Polly and the Scrambler are not sympathetic at all. They are terrible. Back at the Hall of Justice, Jaina is concerned about the supercomputer, but Zan's mad because somebody else is gonna end up with his varsity jacket. First of all, Zan, you haven't talked about hockey since the first issue. I'm surprised you still care about hockey. Have you even tried out? And second of all, that's what you're worried about right now? Some hero. Jaina asks the supercomputer if the Scrambler really has that kind of power. The computer says that he does, but it only extends as far as the Earth. Anyone off-world won't be affected. Not sure why the supercomputer would know that. Maybe because it's connected to the internet? I wonder if its artificial intelligence could become a hero and fight in cyberspace. I bet the Scrambler wouldn't expect that. But the Justice League gathered to deal with this threat, and they are taking it seriously. Superman asked the Wonder Twins if they had any contact with him when they were dealing with the League of Annoyance. They say they didn't, but there are a bunch of villains sitting in jail that might know something, which is a good place to start. Superman tells them to get on it. In the meantime, Superman tells the United Nations that they're doing everything they can to bring the Scrambler to justice, and they tell him that they're already getting reports about the 1,000,000 people who were already scrambled, but we don't get to see any of those reports, which I would have liked to see, but we're just told about them instead. The Justice League thinks that the Scrambler must be working with a whole army of cyber saboteurs and military people, since this is an attack on a global scale, but it's just him and Polly. Apparently he's living in her house now, but he can't go outside because of everything that's going on, so Polly just does everything for him? An underage girl with a crazy middle-aged man in her house. What could possibly go wrong? It then shows the male League of Annoyance members in prison. Praying Mantis, Baron Nightblood, and the Malingerer are catching up, and I'm surprised the Baron isn't mad at Praying Mantis, considering the fact that Mantis was the one that got him arrested in the first place. Nightblood only wanted to troll the Justice League online, but Mantis convinced him to go attack people, which is what led to his encounter with the Wonder Twins and ultimately got him in jail. Not to mention ruined his sobriety streak, but that was somehow the twins' fault too, so you'd think he'd be less amicable towards him. Regardless, Praying Mantis gets called out because he has a visitor. It turns out to be Zan, and Praying Mantis is not happy to see him. He asks Zan if he hasn't ruined his life enough already. Keep in mind, this is after Praying Mantis broke into Zan's house, kidnapped him and his sister from their own beds, imprisoned them against their will, and then attempted to murder them by throwing them into a plastic shredder. But somehow, Praying Mantis being thrown in jail for all of this makes him the victim. I'm sorry, but why exactly are we supposed to feel sorry for this guy? But see what we mean when we say that the villains in this book are terrible? Seriously, Aunt Venom mean was cheering Praying Mantis on while he was about to torture and murder the twins. So no, I don't pity them or the rest of the League of Annoyance. This is just messed up. Anyway, Zan asks if they know about what's going on outside, but Mantis claims that they only get 2 channels, Lex News and Kitten TV. First of all, Kitten TV sounds amazing, so I don't know why he's complaining about being locked up, but more importantly, why wouldn't Lex News be talking about this? It's the biggest news story, they have to cover it, even if they were telling a corrupted take on the event. But Zan explains about the scramble and the chaos that it's causing. But of course, Praying Mantis has to make it all about himself because he's terrible. I usually wouldn't have a problem with villains acting this way when they're obviously in the wrong and the story doesn't try to bolster them. But in this series, the villains are obviously wrong, but the comic is supporting them and shames the heroes for trying to stop them. The comic could at least try to put forth a solution to the problem, or at least explore an alternative that the heroes could use instead of just throwing the bad guys in jail, like maybe sending them to Arkham Asylum. It might do Count Druncula some good to get rehabilitation for his addiction. Then again, Arkham doesn't have the best track record, but anything would have been better than, "How could you do this to me? I was only trying to kill you. Why would you ruin my life like that?"
How selfish are you? It's my big day and yet everything is you. Don't kill me. Don't marry my girl. Give a little.
This is completely ridiculous. Hasn't he ever heard of don't do the crime if you can't do the time? Zan tries to reason with him, saying that his life could be worse after the Great Scramble, but Praying Mantis insists that his life can't possibly get any worse than it already is. Apparently Mantis is actually half bug. I thought it was just a mask. Why are we only finding out about this now? It's issue 6. We really should know more about him by now. He's the leader of the League of Annoyance, yet they never bother to elaborate on his backstory. Maybe now that there's going to be 6 more issues of this book, they will, but honestly, it's too little too late. Plus, it'll probably be really disappointing like the Scrambler's backstory. But he ignores Zan's warnings about ending up on his deathbed or as a slave, or working at a movie theater. I get this is supposed to be a joke, but it's not very funny, saying that working at a movie theater is worse than where Praying Mantis is at right now, or that it's on par with slavery or death. Praying Mantis says that he will help if Zan can meet his demands, as the security guard ushers him away. Mantis goes back and sees a prisoner claiming that he was just doing his laundry when he ended up in this guy's body. This is the only person of the 1,000,000 people that were scrambled that we get to see in this issue, which is disappointing because we should really be seeing the impact of what this scramble is doing to the world. We don't know why this guy was in prison. Was it for something like attempted murder like Praying Mantis and Baron Nightblood? Or was it a less violent crime? This guy being free could be a lot of trouble. Or maybe he's taking advantage of his freedom and starting his life over. But we don't get to see any of that. The guards don't seem to care, which is probably supposed to be commentary on the system, but maybe they don't know about the Great Scramble either? Mantis asks the other League of Annoyance members if they know anything about the Scrambler. The Malingerer says he saw him hanging out with Philo Mass, but that's all he knows. Mantis says it's a literal dead end because Philo doesn't exist anymore. Way to be sensitive. But it turns out that Jaina disguised herself as a fly on the wall, and she finally remembers that Polly exists. Why didn't she call Polly after she fought the League of Annoyance? She said she couldn't wait to tell her. Jaina, you are a terrible friend. Back at Polly's house, she tells the Scrambler that she made it so he doesn't have to be connected to the internet directly to use his power. All he needs is an email from anywhere. You know, we kind of assumed that Polly was gonna be a villain because of her name, but subverting expectations has become kind of popular lately, so we were kind of hoping that maybe she wouldn't end up being a villain. But no, she's a villain, just like we expected. I wouldn't really mind Polly being a villain if it had been set up better, but everything feels so forced. The Scrambler says that's great, but he'd rather stay in the house because there's a few people out there who probably want to have a word with him. You don't say. There's a knock at the door and they both get very concerned. I can't imagine why, but it turns out to be Jaina. She says she knows that Polly's been helping building the Scrambler. Polly asks Jaina if she's going to turn them in, and Jaina says it depends on why they're doing this. Hopefully Jaina's just saying that because she has to take them in. This plan is going to doom the planet. Communication would completely shut down. Imagine all those people who speak different languages are now swapped into different bodies. How could anyone talk to each other? Like that kid who swapped bodies with that businessman. Does he speak English? How would he know what's going on? What about a baby that got swapped with an adult? They couldn't take care of themselves because their minds weren't able to develop past an infant. Jaina better turn them in. So Polly tells Jaina about her fridged mother and how her father disappeared because of a scared white lady with a cell phone. The issue is both of those points were terribly executed, so they don't have any weight to them. They contradicted themselves with Philo's backstory. When he was first introduced, Lex claimed that he owed him $10 million that he borrowed for a personal project, but then they said that Philo was actually an employee of Luther's, and that's what caused all this trouble, and it never specified what that personal project was. I also don't see how they expect us to believe that a Nobel Prize winning accomplished scientist wouldn't have any job opportunities other than Lex Luthor. What about Bruce Wayne and Oliver Queen? And as for cell phone Sylvia, she was already wanted by the police, but the story forgot about that just so they could make a dig at Fox News. And this really poorly handled message about racism. They had to keep piling baggage onto this family for the sake of the message. That way they could push this "the villains were right all along" shtick, even though the villains are genocidal maniacs. So while we would like to sympathize with Polly, the writing is just way too contrived for that. Polly talks about how people lose opportunities because they're locked behind the walls of the system. It shows the prison and call center, pretty much implying that these people were imprisoned unjustly. The problem is all the people that we've seen go to jail in this comic book have deserved it. So it hasn't actually made an argument for unjust imprisonment. And on top of that, back in issue 2, that lady said that 90% of people who get vocational training in prison don't reoffend, which means that the system that they are so vehemently trying to dismantle is 90% effective, which is way too good to be true, but I'll just take the comic at its word. It's not a perfect system, but I don't see how them holding the world hostage is better. There were better ways to get their message across. But anyway, Jaina claims that she can't even begin to argue with her, but we just did. It's not that hard. Instead, Jaina says that they aren't just hurting billionaires and politicians, it's everyone on Earth. Wait, is she saying it's okay to hurt billionaires and politicians? Because they better stay away from Bruce Wayne and Oliver Queen. Not to mention all the other rich superheroes. This isn't justice. How can the Scrambler claim that there's no such thing as evil while he's doing this? Oh right, it's for the greater good.
How can this be for the greater good? The greater good. Shut it!
Jaina again tries to reason with Polly, not understanding that she's just plain evil at this point, because the plot demands it. But she says that she's hurting good people who don't deserve this and that they will die. Polly then goes full supervillain, saying that because bad things happen in the world, good people don't matter, and since she's miserable, everybody else should be too. She also says that if your good doesn't matter, then what does it matter being good? But she really doesn't understand how terrible the world would actually be if there were no good people in it at all. Any small or large act of kindness really makes a difference, and it's disgusting that she doesn't understand that. She could have used her talents and intelligence to do something productive, to get her father back, or at least find out what happened to him, and to actually make a real difference in the world. But instead she went completely off the deep end and decided to join up with the guy she told to get lost. Because that makes sense. She then says that the status quo has killed way more people than any attempt to overthrow the status quo. I can't believe they're actually trying to justify mass genocide. Seriously, why isn't Jaina fighting them on this more? Instead, she claims that it's not their job to fix the world. But Polly claims that it's Jaina's job to fix the world because she's a superhero. But fixing the world isn't a superhero's job. They just stop crime so that way people can continue living in peace. It would be like saying a firefighter's job is to fix the world, when in reality they just limit the collateral damage done by fire and save as many lives as possible. That's basically what superheroes do too. I mean, they can change the world, but that's not actually their job. But Jaina just walks away because the villains are right and she just can't do anything about it, even though they clearly are in the wrong. The ends don't justify the means, so enough with the greater good already. The greater good. The Justice League meets again, and Superman says that satellite imagery hasn't gotten gotten them anywhere. Batman is the greatest detective, and he can't find 2 supervillains in the suburbs, but Superman asks if anyone has any leads, and Jaina keeps her mouth shut. Batman says they can't let strangers use their bodies because there's no telling what they would do with their powers and weapons. And that's a very good point. Some maniac gets Superman's body, more death and destruction. But remember, the bad guys were right all along. Superman says that's true, but they can't just abandon the human race to their fate. This is their home too, and he has faith that they'll stop them in time. Except Batman should have found them already. Superman tells the Wonder Twins to take a spaceship off the planet, but Zan actually steps up and says that he feels this is their home too. He says they'll stay no matter what happens. Wow, I can't believe Zan's actually being a hero. He's willing to put himself on the line for the sake of other people. That's what the real greater good is about. But the whole month passes and now there's only 24 hours before the Great Scramble. Jaina, if your brother can figure it out, you can too. But it looks like Lex News is actually covering it. Like we said, they don't have a choice. It's too big of a news story to ignore. But the news talks about how people are partying and spending time with their loved ones before they're all torn away from each other tomorrow. In the meantime, Lex Luthor is taking advantage of the situation by creating a social network that's specifically for reuniting people after the Great Scramble, because they'll have a password that only they and their family share. So weirdly enough, Lex Luthor is doing more for the planet than the people we're supposed to be rooting for. Yeah, he's profiting off of it, but at least he's trying to connect people. But he has a rocket prepared for him so he can get out of Dodge before the Great Scramble, because of course he does. What else would you expect from Lex? At least he knows what he's doing is scummy. But that does bring up another point. What about all the people who are absolutely taking advantage of this situation, just like Lex? I'm sure there are several people who are all claiming that they're the president, while the president would still be claiming that he is himself. But how would anyone know for sure? You can't trust anybody in this situation. Society would crawl to a halt. What about all the people who are just committing crimes because everyone's too busy dealing with this whole body swap thing? Looting, hurting animals, hurting other people, just complete chaos. Back at the Hall of Justice, the supercomputer says it's going to miss the twins, and Zan asks if they'll even be siblings tomorrow. All this suffering for nothing, Jaina. Jaina says that they'll always be siblings, but she doesn't know what to do about Gleek. Zan says they can't keep him if they don't know who's going to end up in their bodies, so they leave him on a street corner? How is that going to be safe for him? Anything can happen to him out here. Some weirdo could find him on a street corner and hurt him. Zan actually congratulates the Scrambler, because all the world's governments are writing new laws to meet the Scrambler's demands, which never would have happened without him, because this comic is completely unrealistic. But Jaina figures out that these laws will go into effect regardless of whether the Great Scramble happens or not. But what about the million people who are already scrambled? Regardless, she flies off to find Polly. On her way over, she starts monologuing about how Polly was right about the world. Yeah, not really. More like the ramblings of a cynical pessimist. And that's putting it mildly. The comic even has the nerve to lecture about injustice while showing the League of Annoyance. Why do they expect us to sympathize with kidnappers and attempted murderers? But she says that they don't actually need to scramble everybody, they just need to threaten their lives. You heard it here, folks. According to DC Comics, the only way to change the world is through violence and intimidation. She gets to Polly's house only to find that the Justice League is already there. Apparently in between the time it took for Zan and Jaina to fist bump, and Jaina flying to Polly's house, Zan was able to search the entire city of Metropolis, finally locate the Scrambler, and then contact the Justice League and the News, who both managed to beat Jaina there, despite the fact that she actually knew where she was going. That doesn't make any sense. This comic had 3 editors. How on earth did this happen? None of them caught this mistake? Maybe they just thought this was dramatic and didn't care about the consequences it would have on the actual story. Let's just get through this. The world celebrates, and all the laws that were going to go into effect are scrapped. In the aftermath of all of this, Zan wins Employee of the Month at the Hall of Justice, but the comic portrays this all as a hollow victory. The twins blame themselves for what happened, like ruining Polly's life, despite the fact that Polly was responsible for her own actions and had multiple other options, but chose the worst and most ridiculous option. But sure, it's all the twins' fault. Zan calls Earth a dump truck wreck of a planet, but it's their planet. Lucky us. As if this all wasn't bad enough, it then switches to the real hero hero of the story, the Scrambler. The comic tries to justify his genocidal tendencies, claiming that he was only trying to enact meaningful change in the world, and that heroes and villains are really no different from each other. On top of that, this rotten joke of a world will destroy itself in due time anyway. Of course, there are a lot of issues with the world, and we can definitely have conversations about it, and the best way to go about handling these topics. Then again, Mark Russell isn't much for conversation, is he? But this alarmist and cynical view of the world is not productive. It's also very steeped in stereotypes, and this black and white view of the world just isn't realistic. The only way I could possibly recommend this book to anyone is if you already agree with all of Mark Russell's opinions and don't mind being lectured to. It's one thing to give the audience something to think about, and it's another thing to basically tell them what to believe. Especially when the message of the book is to save the world through violence and intimidation and genocide. That's just going to lead to more problems thanks to resentment and anger in the survivors. But that's just our opinion. What do you guys think? We'd love to hear from you. The Wonder Twins comic is going on hiatus for a month, but it'll be back in September. That being said, we still have more to say about the topic, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks for watching, everybody. We really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content from us, you can like this video and subscribe to our channel. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye, everyone. Bye, guys.